So when it comes to crazy NBA draft comparisons, you've probably seen things like this. Adam Morrison being compared to Larry Bird, Klay Thompson being compared to Marco Bellinelli. But in making this video, I'm betting that you haven't seen some of the most insane NBA draft comparisons of the 2010s. Really quickly though, I want to let you know about the sponsor of today's video, Prize Picks. So here's how it works. You download the Prize Picks app, and for tonight's games, you have a ton of different players to pick from. You've got Luka, you've got Kat, you've got LaMelo, you've got Saddiq Bey after a 51-point game, you've got Giannis, and it's you against these numbers. They have numbers for combined points, assists, rebounds, points, fantasy score, and you select over or under for each player. So for example, maybe you like those 5 players together that I mentioned, Giannis, LaMelo, Luka, Saddiq Bey, and Kat. So let's say you combine those 5 players together, this is what you would win on $20. And to help get you started, Prize Picks will match dollar for dollar on your first deposit up to $100 when you use code SPORTING. So again, the app is Prize Picks, the code is SPORTING, and thank you again to Prize Picks for sponsoring this video. We begin the comparisons with one of my favorites, Rui Hachimura of the Washington Wizards being compared to Kawhi Leonard. So we'll take you back to the night of the draft when Rui was selected. They had Chauncey Billups on the ESPN broadcast of the draft, and his job basically was to give player comparisons for that draft. And over and over and over again, he was giving the most lofty expectations for every single player in the class. We could probably do an entire video just on who Chauncey thought those players were going to end up becoming. And he said, there was a graphic and everything, that Rui Hachimura reminded him of Kawhi Leonard. At the time, I'm like, well, what are we talking about? But then in doing research for this video, I found out that that was not an uncommon opinion. There are other players, Jared Dudley, Isaiah Thomas, that were thinking, hey, there's shades of Kawhi Leonard to this guy's game. And the only thing that makes it seem even remotely possible that they would be even remotely the same kind of player is the fact that Rui is bigger and plays at his own pace. That's literally it. Like, he's very square to the rim. He does not really get sped up ever. And that's it. He has not become the kind of player that I hope that he would be. He was basically a 4 full-time at Gonzaga. He still has some time to grow and develop, but to compare him to Kawhi was out of control. Now that you understand what I'm trying to do, here are some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the video. Justice Winslow being compared to James Harden, Donovan Mitchell being compared to Norman Powell, Bam Adebayo to Markieff Morris and Tristan Thompson, Dragan Bender to Hedo Turkoglu, and potentially the most egregious of all, Stanley Johnson being compared to Kawhi and Ron Artest. Seriously, there's so many more. I could do a whole nother video on this. Here's another one that's really fun. Karl Anthony Towns being compared to Andrew Bogut. Now, this is not an Andrew Bogut disrespect moment here. He made an All-NBA team. He had a really good career, and had he not continually gotten hurt, would have had an even better career. But it's hard to think of 2 players stylistically that are more different than Andrew Bogut and Karl Anthony Towns. Karl Anthony Towns just won the 3-point contest and is one of the best spacing bigs we've ever seen in the league and is an incredible offensive force. And Andrew Bogut was an incredible defender, a really good passer, and wasn't much of an offensive threat, even at his peak. And so to compare those 2 guys, to look at it now, is really, really funny. Now, granted, people didn't think that Kat was going to be this kind of spacer at the time of the draft, and he really was seen as more of this like all-around player, a guy that could be a Swiss Army knife, potentially grow into a really good offensive player. And that's kind of what we thought about Andrew Bogut at the time. But to look at where Kat is now and what Andrew Bogut was throughout his career and think that that was the comparison for those 2 guys is really, really funny. Here's another one. Kyrie Irving being compared to Chris Paul. Now, on the surface, it's like, well, they both became really good players. Chris Paul is fantastic. Kyrie's really good. What's the problem? Well, the problem is stylistically, again, they are very, very different. Chris Paul is the ultimate point guard. He's going to set everybody else up. At this point in his career, he's going to average somewhere around 15 points per game, and he's just going to be the engine of everything, right? And I think more so than ever, we've seen in Brooklyn that Kyrie is not a point guard. He is a smaller 2 guard that can dominate the basketball at times when he's feeling it, but a lot of times wants to play off the ball. He doesn't want to be the setup guy. He doesn't want to be the guy that's responsible for, running everything offensively. And so to have that comparison is really interesting, and it's really funny to look back on. Now, granted, it's just like with every comparison, it's so difficult to tell what a player is going to become once they get to the league, but to compare Kyrie to the ultimate point guard, Chris Paul, and for him to ultimately not even really become a point guard at the NBA level is pretty insane. Okay, now here's another big one. Ben Simmons being compared to LeBron James. So the idea of comparing anybody to LeBron, the worst case, second best basketball player of all time, as a draft prospect is just really never a good idea, right? I think in general, we've kind of retired the whole let's find the next LeBron thing. At one point, we thought Andrew Wiggins was the next LeBron. We thought Shabazz Muhammad was the next LeBron. Not we, but some people. And obviously, Ben Simmons has not become that. There is some minor similarities. They are bigger players. They're both very good passers. They can be very good in transition, but that's pretty much where the comparisons stop. I remember seeing a lot of Lamar Odom comparisons for Ben Simmons at the time of the draft. I think that made more sense, not just the fact that they're both supposedly left-handed, but the fact that, they are not necessarily offensive focal points, but they are guys that can create offense for you specifically in transition and are very good passers and are very unique as players. But I think we've kind of retired the LeBron comparisons for now. Another great one, we can't stop comparing people to Kawhi Leonard. Josh Jackson was compared to Kawhi Leonard and Jimmy Butler at the time of the draft by some people. And I've had a lot of content about Josh Jackson over the years. It's pretty clear that he's not going to be a very good NBA player. But basically, we used to do this with every highly drafted defensive-minded wing. If you were a good athlete that could guard and had some room to grow, let's say offensively, people compared you to Kawhi or Jimmy Butler. It happened with Josh Jackson. It's happened to a lot of wings over the years. And again, I feel like this is another thing. The Jimmy Butler thing, he's a unique player. I think it's hard to compare players to him. And Kawhi is another comparison we probably just need to put away for a while. Like, it's unlikely we're going to see another guy like that was drafted in the middle of the first round that becomes an all-NBA player, one of the best players in the league, an incredible defender early in their career, and improve as much as Kawhi has. I think it's going to be really difficult to see that again. And it kind of happened a little bit with Wiggins, where people saw athleticism and a little bit of a raw offensive game and translated that to, well, they're going to be an incredible defender at the next level just because they weren't necessarily the best offensive players at the college level. And that is kind of where this Kawhi comparison comes from. And I think it's okay to just go ahead and turn that one down and put that one away. Speaking of Kawhi, you might have seen this one. He was compared at the time of the draft to Luke Richard Mbah-a-Moute. I'm actually going to attempt to pronounce that one correctly. Basically, he was a role player type wing that really couldn't shoot the ball that well. Was a pretty good athlete, and that was about it. And honestly, like that was a pretty accurate idea of where people thought Kawhi was at the time of the draft. There's a reason he got drafted where he was. And this one really is only funny in hindsight. Some of these, even at the time, were like, why are we comparing Josh Jackson to Kawhi, right? But the Kawhi one at the time, a lot of people did think that he, was just going to be a two-way wing if he could improve as a shooter, maybe be a nice contributor on good teams. And for him to improve the way that he did was unbelievable. Next up, we're going fast here. CJ McCollum being compared to Steph Curry. And this one's painful because it's very clear where the thought process went here. Smaller guard out of a smaller school. Let's give him the Steph comparison. That's basically what it came down to, because again, stylistically, they really weren't all that similar, even in their days in college. And Steph, now at the time that this comparison was made in 2013, Steph hadn't really become Steph yet, so it wasn't like they were comparing him to MVP level Steph, because CJ got drafted in 2013. But still, we could have put a little bit more thought into it rather than just, they went to a small school and they're a smaller guard, let's compare him to Steph. That's another one that over the years we've got to retire. People thought Trae Young was the next Steph. We're never, probably, I don't think, for a very, very long time, going to see another Steph, going to see another Kawhi, going to see another LeBron. And I'm going to do my best to never, ever compare a draft prospect to any of those guys. And with that small school to small school comparison, this feels like a really good place to include the most stereotypical NBA draft comparisons. One of them being small school to small school, another common one being lefties to lefties. Of course, we have every international player ever being compared to other international players. And then one of my personal favorites, because it's the most funny, every goofy white guy being compared to another goofy white guy. I put this in there just to say comparisons are hard. And they're even more difficult to get right. But if we maybe dig a little bit deeper than just comparing what's on the very surface level, like what handedness a player is, maybe we could start to be a little bit better about it. Not that I'm an expert or anything. Next up now, Victor Oladipo being compared to Tony Allen. Now, a lot of people love Tony Allen. He was a fun player at his peak, really kind of embodied what those Memphis teams were about. And Oladipo, this kind of shows you where we're at with the 2013 draft. Oladipo was the second pick in the draft, people comparing him to Tony Allen. And so it was a guy that was slightly undersized, had a lot of defensive potential, a lot of athleticism, and what Victor Oladipo became at his peak offensively, certainly people did not expect him to become that. But I don't think the expectation was so low that he was going to be Tony Allen, where he was never going to have the basketball, he was never going to be able to space, and he basically was a one-way defensive player. Oladipo had more upside than that. Now, it's kind of one of those things where similar to the Kawhi thing, where it's like, oh, you have good athleticism, let's compare you to an incredible defender. And Oladipo had the tools to be a really good defender and ultimately became one, but offensively, really the growth that he made is what separated him from this kind of comparison. But even at the time, I think this one was, for a guy that ended up going second in the draft, pretty pessimistic comparison. And then last up now, Jamal Murray being compared to Ben Gordon. This one is just funny in hindsight because Jamal Murray was a bit of an amoeba as a draft prospect. People really didn't know what to expect from him. Was he an on-ball guy? Was he an off-ball guy? What position was he? And Ben Gordon was an undersized two that could create a little bit on the ball, but was mostly in off-ball space, would run off screens and things like that. It was a very good player. But again, stylistically, to look at Jamal Murray now as a guy that has the basketball a ton when Nikola Jokic doesn't have it, is really good in the pick and roll, is a fantastic spacer on or off the ball. You really couldn't get much different from a guard standpoint than Ben Gordon. And to think of Jamal Murray as just this off-ball spacer guy running off screens, things like that, it's not hard to envision that given the way that he plays, but he's just such a more active on-ball player than Ben Gordon ever was to really make this comparison make sense now. And I think even at the time, even with how confusing Murray was at times as a prospect, is kind of funny to look back on. And yeah, that's the end of the video. My name is Tucker. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you all next time.